Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the IoT For All Podcast. I'm Ryan Chacon, and on today's episode, we're going to talk about wide-scale IoT adoption and why to some it still remains elusive, and is space and satellites the solution to helping increase IoT adoption? With me today will be Ben Cade, the CEO of Myriota. They are a company that is focused on anywhere connectivity, making it possible through their patented direct-to-satellite technology. If you are watching this on YouTube, subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. If you are listening to this on a podcast directory, be sure to subscribe to get the latest episodes as soon as they are out. Last thing I will mention before we dive into this, we have recently launched our AI For All podcast, all about AI, lots of very interesting topics and fantastic guests. Be sure to go over to our AI For All YouTube channel to subscribe so you get the latest episodes as soon as they are out, and you can check out all that awesome content that we're going to be putting out weekly. Other than that, let's get on to the episode. Troverlo Autonomo is rewriting the rules of asset tracking and data collection. No more chasing elusive devices or losing sleep over data breaches. Autonomo's unique background app ensures you stay in control even when devices go off the grid. It's scalable, platform compatible, and delivers a rapid return on investment. Visit troverlo.com, that's TROVERLO.com now, and harness the power of Autonomo to transform your IT department. Welcome, Ben, to the IoT For All podcast. It's great to have you.
Well, likewise, really excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you. Looking forward to this conversation. And I'd love it if you could kick this off by giving a quick introduction about yourself and the company to our audience.
I'm an electronic engineer. I started my career at great companies like Sony, at ARM. Was there for nearly over a decade. And we went from pretty much nobody ever hearing about ARM to ARM powering most of the world's IoT devices. I was lucky enough there to find the opportunity to found two different businesses, one in open source called Linaro, growing strong today. And then more recently, back in 2012, formed a business called Trustonic, which was all about trying to help change the state of security in IoT devices. And we know that's something that's plagued those kinds of devices. So roll forward 8 years and billions of devices, we hope we made a difference there. And as you do in the middle of the pandemic, we decided to change location, move to Australia, and that's where I discovered actually a really vibrant deep tech community. Came along, found investors that really focus on deep tech, like Main Sequence Ventures, and I was lucky enough to meet a really good group of people at Myriota who are really trying to change connectivity by delivering that through satellites anywhere in the world, very, very securely and at very, very low power. So that's where I'm at today, leading that business and helping it go global.
Awesome. Yeah. The name, so Myriota has been a name that has come up many times in the past in conversations and through my experience in the IoT space. So I'm finally glad we're able to connect, have somebody from the team on the podcast to kind of shed some light on your expertise and what you all focus on. Given your experience that you have in the space and a very extensive background, kind of what led you to where you are now, talk to me about how you've seen adoption kind of evolve in I guess, a way to put it, in the IoT space. Because I feel like when I joined the industry, one of the big things we did here at IoT For All was try to help educate people to better understand the value of IoT so that they could have more understanding of the value IoT can provide, so they're more likely to adopt. Because adoption's always been kind of the thing everybody is striving for that helps the industry grow to meet those projections that the analysts keep giving us. But to some degree, depending on who you talk to, adoption has maybe not always reached that potential at times, or in certain industries, it didn't go the way people thought. So why does it, I guess from your perspective, talk to me about how you see adoption in the IoT space. Is it something that still is relatively elusive when it comes to widespread, or how do you kind of see things, or how things kind of evolve from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and there's a lot of things to unpack within that. But I remember back about 2005, we started talking about the Internet of Everything, and that was something that eventually became the Internet of Things, and we've grown from there. So look, is IoT happening? Well, if you take this more broad definition of IoT that we have today, where you talk about home devices, like many of the devices sat behind you, absolutely right, because they're within an environment that's more controlled, your home, you've got access to Wi-Fi, for example, and the vendors are building something that will just work, right? And so it has to have that simplicity. It has to do what it says on the box, and it has to be at the right price point. So we're not universal there for sure, but we're way further ahead in that level of adoption. You see similar things in, let's call it things like smart factories and enterprise, where again, a business has control of that particular environment, right? It can put Wi-Fi or it can put cellular systems in private 5G in, and it can control that environment. So we're seeing update there. And set that in context, I think, and again, analyst numbers should always be taken with a relative level of a pinch of salt, right? But you're talking about, roughly speaking, 30 billion connected devices right now out there. But if you talk about what we really meant when we first coined the phrase Internet of Everything, we were really focusing more on that really embedded, the things that are kind of invisible that will start appearing everywhere, not necessarily close to us in our homes or in our factories, but actually in the natural environment. And that definitely hasn't happened, right? So then you have to start looking at that and say, why is that? Well, and it's fundamentally why I got excited with Myriota, is because for the first time, you're getting, and there's not just Myriota, there are other businesses out there trying to solve this problem, but how do you deliver something that's, really about remote sensing, remote location, basic, but really important pieces of data that you need to get back home somewhere, right? And how do you do that in a way that's just going to work? So I think you've had this challenge, which is, it's not easy to, firstly, it's not easy to conceive, and therefore it's not easy to see where the ROI is. And even if you're convinced that this is a good thing, then you don't even know if that device, when it's actually installed in its native environment, is actually going to have any connectivity at all, and therefore going to be able to solve that use case. And even if you get through those two parts, you get to the third problem, which is battery life, right? Because, it's okay to change your battery. I mean, it's a pain, right? But you change your thermostat battery every 6 months. It's really annoying. Actually, every 2 years, it's still annoying. But in the field where you've got to go and travel somewhere, that's really difficult. And so you have those sort of connection of different problems, right? If you can get connectivity and you can guarantee that, great. Then is it simple enough for anybody to be able to install? Very rarely right now. And then if you get through those parts, will it live in the field for years without having to go and sort of, physically maintain it?
Yeah, it's been an interesting conversation, because a lot of the guests I have on obviously are in different industries with different vertical focuses, building different components of IoT solutions that they bring to market, and it depends on kind of where they are on how fast adoption has grown from their perspective. I think one area that's interesting to kind of elaborate on is, and you mentioned this a couple of times, is the connectivity piece, right? They have lots of different connectivity options, which enable these solutions to exist at a cost that makes sense, as well as provide the experience that the end user is expecting, assuming they have the connectivity that works for them. But and a lot of people are overwhelmed by the decision-making process that goes into different types of connectivity. But the way I kind of talk to them about is just explain that the value of having a lot of different connectivity options is you're more likely to find something that's tailored for your use case in the environment, which is going to be deployed at a cost that makes sense to kind of reach ROI and so forth. But let me ask you from your perspective in the satellite connectivity space, how do you see that kind of fitting in? I've had guests on that are in the satellite space before, and a lot of times what they'll tell me is that they're still pretty early on. It works to bring connectivity in areas that don't have access to connectivity like cellular. You can't set up LoRa or something like that. But how do you view satellite connectivity kind of in the spectrum of IoT connectivity and what it can enable?
Yeah, well, look, I think the first part is there's no silver bullet, right? Satellite connectivity brings benefits for a range of different applications and use cases, but terrestrial will be a better solution in a range of others. So the part that actually we've discovered as we've gone through this is actually we've got to get rid of talking about satellite or terrestrial or all of those different parts. We've got to actually just focus on it just works, right? Which is why you might see something that looks a little bit like something out of Aliens behind me. That is that is a tank monitoring unit you can buy on the shelf in a Bunnings, Elders store, effectively equivalent of Home Depot in the US, for a few $100, and it can be installed by anybody with zero knowledge. And so that's really our focus, as you say, is we're going after very particular Myriota, very particular use cases in very particular sectors, and we're trying to deliver that. It does exactly what it says on the box, and anybody can install it. And if you go and Google somebody like an agbot, you'll see a bunch of videos by farmers that are just showing how they install that. So I think that's where, we as an industry need to move towards, which is stop talking about the technology and focus on the problems and how easy you can deliver a solution that will just work.
No, absolutely. I think there's plenty of options out there when it comes to all the different components, from the software to the hardware to the connectivity, you name it, to build something. But at the end of the day, it needs to serve the purpose of the end user and the company and fit in with kind of the requirements that are realistic, obviously, to make this something that's affordable and can hopefully be successful to get to scale. How do you kind of see things evolving over the next few years as far as just the industry in general? Do you see, like, we've started to see some consolidation happen? I think for the last few years, I've talked to people about consolidation, and a lot of people I spoke to have kind of agreed that consolidation is going to happen, has happened, needs to happen. How do you see it? Do you see this kind of being dominated by a few players over the next 3, 5, 10 years? Or do you see there being more vertical specific niches where a couple companies are able to own, but it's more that way as opposed to, a couple companies just dominating everything?
When I came across Myriota, and you talk about satellite, the natural companies that come to mind are, Starlink, SpaceX, formidable, amazing technology businesses delivering a great solution, OneWeb's, and obviously Amazon's coming up. Now, what I see, more broadly is there's two very different worlds, right? There is the sort of mobile broadband, high-speed data, satellite, Starlink, amazing solutions plugged into something, a PowerPoint, right? And running at a cost point that's, $80, $100 a month and several $100 a month for. So do I think that's going to be a challenging place for anybody else to enter? Yeah, absolutely, right? So you've got some legacy players, and then you've got these more recent new entrants with very, very strong and huge capital. There will be some more consolidation there, but I don't think you're going to talk about 5 competitive players. I think you might at least, China will have its own solution, but you will have, 3 or 4 probably. But then on the other extreme, there's a number of companies that have tried and continue to do what Myriota does. That's, at a different extreme, right? We're not operating with billions of dollars to deliver, very, very extensive constellations. You're trying to serve basically, a different problem, which is very narrowband data at very, very, very low cost. And so that's a fundamentally different system. What you're seeing there actually is you're seeing consolidation, or you're seeing people just give up. And the reason for that is because actually it turns out it's really, really hard to punch out to space by 600 kilometers with a really, really weak low power signal. And so if you don't have that signal processing and you can't deal with, for example, Australia is pretty easy, right? It's pretty quiet from a radio frequency noise perspective. If you go to Europe or East Coast of the US, it's really, really noisy, right? It's really hard. So yeah, I do see some consolidation happening. I think, the reality is, yes, it's still early, but to give you context, against some of the, let's call it large traditional old space companies, we're probably now shipping about 75% of their volume into new markets. So we've gone from nowhere in 3 years ago to right on their tails with a handful of salespeople.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think the different kind of components of an IoT solution, those areas, the consolidation might be different rates, just because they serve different purposes and they touch different industries in a certain way. One thing I think it's important for companies to do is really understand the industries that they're selling into and build solutions and markets as solutions. This is less about the kind of connectivity companies or the hardware companies per se, but more about solutions, the solution companies that I think a lot of people think about how many platforms are out there in the industry, right? Like there's lots of platform players that their platform can do everything, work for every use case. But in reality, that's not what buyers are looking for. Buyers are looking for people to understand their business, their industry, their problem, and they've built something with some domain knowledge to say, hey, I understand what you're going through. Here's a solution that fixes it. We get it. We've built, we know what you need from us. And I'm starting to see more companies go that route. I'm starting to see more companies build solutions, market solutions, as opposed to just technology. And I think that's a big step for the industry as a whole. The more successes we see, the more likely people are to feel comfortable adopting IoT, which goes back to our first question about mass adoption and how do we kind of get there. When you look back on kind of the work you've done and what you've gone through since you've been in the IoT space, what are some of the things you've learned to build with building an IoT company that is having an effect globally? And what advice would you have for companies out there that are looking on ways to grow, to just help themselves succeed in the IoT space in general?
I think you really hit the nail on the head in that sort of discussion, right? Which is the biggest problem you have, and it's one of the first things we did when I came in and joined the Myriota team. And Myriota's been going since 2015, is to say, well, where are we going to focus? Because it's really easy to talk about, well, we've got connectivity and we can do everything, and so many different use cases. But if you don't go deeper and you don't really understand a particular problem and you understand, hey, you know what? Just because we could solve it doesn't mean we should solve it or try to solve it. Maybe we're not the best, and really, actually, maybe we're not the best placed people to solve that. So you've got to have high conviction that the area that you're going for, you can solve it better than anybody else, right? And that's that sort of right to win. That's why we're focused on tank monitoring, for example, just because we know the proposition is rock solid. We can deliver it at the right cost point that's driving, growth that's thousands of percent a year, not, tens or 20% that most people are sort of happy with we're growing fast, right? Well, that's not fast because you're growing from a very small base. I'd say the other issues that we've had also speak to the fact that we need to be less about the technology and more about the solution. And so, we either work very closely with, our maker partners that are building devices that really understand their customer and make sure that, we're doing everything we can to make that whole experience as seamless as possible. Or you see, in the industry, there's, particularly in the embedded space, there's this, there's clearly markets that have, players with very, very large volumes or large volume potential. But there's this long tail, right? And that long tail in embedded is very, very long and a very significant proportion of all potential devices. So that's why we have units like we call the sense and locate, which is a piece of hardware that's already ready to go, right? You add a little bit of software connected to your cloud and you're done, right? And so, if you've got a deployment, there's a lot of companies that are trying to do some innovation in IoT, but they may only have volume of 500 units or 1,000 units, and we're not talking millions of units here. So how do you equip them? They don't want to go and build a device. They don't want to take a microchip from Myriota and build the antenna and everything else. They just want to say, hey, I know this problem. I can solve it. Can you help me get there faster? And so those are parts of the evolution that we've learned we need to do more of and be better at.
Let me ask you this: when you look at the current state of the market now, where do you feel like the biggest challenges kind of are had, or what challenges do you feel like we face the most as the IoT industry kind of currently stays now and potentially where it's going?
Yeah, look, I think part of this will be solved a little bit by consolidation because there's just a lot of noise out there. So the fact that there will be fewer, and by that I don't mean nobody wants an oligopoly or a monopoly, right? But I think just more focus with some players with scale. I think that's gonna move us forward. I think there's a general challenge in the industry though, which is there's a lot of noise about what might happen in future, but for all of us that have seen this cycle many times over, what is portrayed as just around the corner is actually realistically 5 to 10 years from now. And we're very excited by some of those aspects, but we need to make sure that we focus on solving the problems today with a transition to things that might come in future, as opposed to everybody getting stalled on, sort of a magic sort of silver bullet in future, which may never arrive. So I think that's always the challenge for us, especially when, you have a lot of these innovative IoT companies, but they're not capitalized like a Starlink or an Amazon. And so if there's more focus on people doing what they do really, really well, and we get that success, I think that will help everybody gain confidence in, the benefits of IoT, right? You talk, if we talk for a minute about, some of the other standards out there, right? You've got 5G, we've got NB-IoT, we've got LoRa, they're really good solutions for different environments and different use cases. So I think as an industry, what we've got to be able to do is just show where they make sense and where they make less sense, so that people, as they're going through this, can understand, hey, okay, this is why I would want to invest in a LoRa network for my factory versus, hopefully Telstra's got some 5G connection, or I'm going to go a completely different route.
One question I wanted to ask you that I don't think we've ever spoken or asked anyone this on the show before. I think it's a good way to kind of wrap up our conversation, is around experience that you've had with companies who have worked with other IoT companies, but have not seen success, who potentially have been kind of burnt by those relationships, those experiences, and are now hesitant to get back into IoT, or hesitant to try again to launch a pilot or a POC to prove the value. Even if it was, within the last year or the last 5 years. Obviously technology has changed a good bit, but what would you say to people out there listening who have said, look, I've given IoT a shot, it didn't work out for me. Why should they like reconsider and really think about getting back into it as this industry is going to progress forward at what we hope is a pretty fast rate?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a really hard question, right, to answer. One part that we've learned is that to work that you don't want to burn your partners, firstly. So, you need to be very honest about where various things are in the technology roadmap. And you need to have those, as you're embracing new technology, you need to have those early adopters that are lined up with you. They know there's going to be some speed bumps along the way, and you're going to work through that together. And so we've had some, pretty patient, very supportive partners that are now enjoying the benefit of that perseverance. Of course, those people that sort of fast follow into that then enjoy the benefit of something that's already a bit more proven. But to your point, right, if you've been burnt before, you're going to be a lot more skeptical, right? And you're going to ask these questions. And actually, that's exactly what we see where people have gone after the tank monitoring market. For example, in agriculture before, they've listened to the claims that it will be a panacea and it will work, or it will just work. And now they come back. The good thing is they ask all the right and hard questions, right? Well, prove to me this or that. So, of course, if you've got some heritage and if you've got some proof points, you can go and engage with those parties and help hopefully convince them that, yeah, sorry that you had a bad experience last time, but this is why this is different, right? And here's the proof. The challenge is where there still is no proof and you're knocking on that door and there's no other comparative point to say, hey, look, we did it over here in a similar way. And that is a challenge that, most definitely we hit upon time and time again, is people have had a really bad experience. And it's one of the focus areas for us, which, we as a business have evolved to, which says, let's be clearer on where the ROI is. So let's be very upfront on the costs, the expected gains. Let's sit with those partners, have those conversations. And then on the second side, we need to make it easier for people to get to that first validation and proof. And that's why we built solutions like Sensor Locate. You're never going to get to a cost point for a custom device with a general device, but that general device will give you a level of proof and confidence to say, hey, I want to move forward here. And now I'm convinced.
Early on in IoT, we kind of had this chicken and egg problem where people were saying, I have the solution I want to adopt, but there were no real use cases or examples or easy things to adopt to kind of start to prove the value. But now I feel like we're in a spot where that's more likely of a starting point and more easily adopted kind of situation for companies. How do you feel like we're kind of getting out of that chicken and the egg problems or kind of situation, I guess? And I know it's not a problem, but more of a situation for companies that, we're asking them to adopt, but they're like, yeah, but show me success first. And then it's kind of like, well, how do you handle that? But where do you think we are there?
We are making progress. Are we making it at the progress we all hoped? No, but I think as an industry, we're learning to get better at it, most definitely. And, success breeds more success. So I think this is that classic problem of, in that world of embedded IoT, we're really growing from a low base. So we're growing very quickly, but we're still growing from a low base. And so we'll roll this forward a couple of years. Yes, it will be much more significant, and that success will permeate through. But you can't stay just in your lane, right? I think that's what we've learned is you can't just say, hey, we're going to be a communications company and the brilliance of our technology will see us home, right? That doesn't work. Right? People struggle all the way through to the end customer. And if the customer is or prospect is struggling, then everybody is going to struggle. So you've got to have better empathy and you've got to work with your partners to make sure that it does literally just work out of the box for an environment that isn't this complex sort of enterprise IoT install, right? And that's what we've seen in the industry, right? Is you've got companies like solution integrators making a lot of money, being able to provide the glue. But if you're talking about something you're going to go down to Best Buy or Target and buy off the shelf, it's just got to work. And you've got to get to a cost point that it just works. And you've got to be able to have a customer support environment where you're not being flooded by all 100,000 customers calling you to say, I don't understand why I'm not getting my data back, or, it's not updating, or the batteries run out, or everything else.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of companies are trying to get to the point where IoT for at least businesses, enterprise is more out of the box, where it's easily to kind of buy out. You can almost buy it off the shelf. But we've learned in a lot of cases, there is a level of kind of customization that needs to be done. Not saying it's always a heavy amount, but enough that's needed to tailor to a particular use case, a particular end user, a certain environment for that business. And we're getting to, I think at least we're getting to a spot where a lot of these solutions are, 75, 80% there, just need that extra little application layer tied on, or the customization layer tied on, to really tailor it to solve the problem directly, and not try to be like a one size fits all solution that just, you kind of finagle it around to make it work. It needs to be more tailored to that use case, which I think we're getting to. We have a lot more no code, low code solutions out there to make this more easily used and not require heavy development resources and money. So I think it seems like all the right things are being done. It's just, how fast do they get done, and how quickly do people are people able to see success to justify that scale spend?
It all comes back to the ROI, right? Can you demonstrate you solved the problem, that you've delivered the value? Really, really, if you can boil that down, the technology side, it is, by the way, really hard to build a generic solution that can go left, right, or any other way between different environments. It's much less hard to do a really good job in a particular area. So I think that journey, and it's the same for Myriota, right? We will become more and more general purpose, but we can do that one target vertical, one use case at a time. Maybe then we go from 1 and 1 to 2 and 2 and 4 and 4, but to build that journey out. And so I think if, as an industry, we start picking off those segments and solving those problems, everybody's going to get more comfortable. And then eventually we're going to get down to areas, in the world where, and this is the important bit, right? It's not just the solution, or that, like, let's call it the engineering side. It's not just the ROI, but it's also the accessibility to get that solution into people's hands, right? And that's something we take for granted because we have, nice environments and, live in a sort of established world. But if you go into Latin America or you go into sub-Saharan Africa, there are absolutely benefits for loads of these things, but how do you get it out there? How do you sort of find that channel to market to solve those problems? And how do you deliver that at a cost point that makes sense? So you've got to take all three, but are we getting there? Yeah. I'd love to jump on this show again in 18 months time, Ryan, and say, yep, this is the progress that's been tangibly made, and show the different amounts of things that have moved forward. And then you can hold my feet to the fire to say, are we winning or not?
Absolutely. No, I'd love to have you back. I think it'd be great to kind of do a check-in and just revisit a lot of these topics, because what we're talking about here is going to carry over as we grow, as the industry itself grows. And it's stuff that we're all hoping we can achieve. And a lot of these challenges we're talking about, will they be solved? A lot of pieces of advice and ideas and learnings you've had are only going to, you're going to have more of those. So, yeah, definitely love to have you back. But in the meantime, our audience out there who is going to listen to this, watch this, have questions, want to follow up, learn more about what you have going on, what's the best way they can do that?
Two ways, I'd say. One, if you just survive through what I was talking about and you like to connect, just reach out on LinkedIn. Very happy to talk to anybody in the industry. Secondly, of course, you want to learn about Myriota and what we're doing and maybe how you can take advantage of that, then just go to myriota.com, myriota.com, and you'll find hopefully a pretty easy environment to get going.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for taking the time. I've been excited to get this recorded and have a conversation with you and get Myriota into or out to our audience in a more kind of detailed way to learn more what you have going on, learn about your expertise and your all kind of thoughts. So I appreciate the time and excited to get this out to our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Ryan, the pleasure's all mine, and thanks very much for having us.